main aim of the overhaul period this winter is really to get a good map of the aircraft and see any work that needs to be done in order to make her airworthy. So there's 4 stages this winter. First stage is removal of all components and rigging her in a flying position such as this. Second stage is the complete paint strip of the aircraft. Third stage is survey and rectification of any work. And then fourth stage is the repaint, ready for rolling her out again, hopefully next May. So stage 1 of course is complete. All the components are situated behind the aircraft. So we've taken off various things that will come off, such as wingtips, ailerons, elevators, bomb doors, all your cowlings and the DAs behind the engines. All the turrets are off, rudders are off, bit of the turret holders come off as well. This is all really to enable the paint strip to be a little bit easier because they can get in behind all the places they need to, and they can do all the components on the ground rather than doing them at height. Okay, so removal of components was a lot easier than we expected. Obviously the aircraft's 70 years old. When you find a steel nut and bolt, it is generally corroded and won't come off. But actually we found with the preparation work that we'd done, it actually worked a lot easier than we thought. So it became about a week ahead of schedule in the first 2 weeks of the project. Lifting her into the flying attitude went well. We had a crane that came in to lift the tail of the aircraft up. The tail of the Lanc only really weighs about 1.5 tons, so it's quite light. The main process to getting it in this position is to lift the tail onto the trestle and then jack the front up to meet it. And then you jack the whole of the aircraft up together to keep it level, to take it to the height that you want. We then of course took the wheels off and took all the stress off the aircraft by trestling the wings as well. That leaves the aircraft in a position where it is no longer under any stress, so you can start to remove some of the panels that are the strength stress parts of the aircraft. The paint strip of the aircraft took 12 days. We used a company called Mars Aviation who strip a lot of Ryanair's fleet. They say one of their aircraft used to take about 4 days to paint strip. So this one took 12, so it just shows you what trouble they had. The main problem they had was the fact that the aircraft's got about 4 layers of paint on it, and that's probably through its life for about 40 years since its last paint strip. The top few layers came off quite easily because they were just brush stroke polyurethane paint that had been added from the original paintwork, so it came off very easily. What they found is, because of the different types of paint that we used, the paint stripper that was good for the top coat wasn't necessarily good for the coat after that, so I did have a lot of problems actually getting all the paint off. The base layer of paint was what was put on when the aircraft was at RAF Scampton being prepared to put on the gate, so that would have been in the late 70s that work was being done to her. At that point she was stripped right back to bare aluminium as she is, and then repainted with the coat of paint they put on her to put her on the gate. The worst part of the aircraft they found to strip was the roundels. They say there was about 10 or 12 layers of paint on the roundels on the aircraft. We suspect that's probably one of the punishments when it was at the gate at Scampton for anybody who misbehaved or didn't have anything to do, go and put another layer of paint on them roundels. Quite often the roundels are the bits that fade the most because of the colour of them. Okay, so obviously we like to paint strip now. Paint stripping, it means that you can see all the damage or levels of corrosion to the aircraft, the skin of the aircraft, that you can't see with the paint on. The one thing paint is good for is hiding lots of things underneath. Certainly with 4 layers of paint on the aircraft, there are areas of corrosion that would normally bubble through a layer of paint, but with 4 on, it was very difficult to see really the true condition of the airframe. What we've got to do to make this aircraft airworthy, certainly in the eyes of the CAA at this stage, is demonstrate the condition of the aircraft now and show what work we have to do to it. So we've taken all the paint off to show the bare aluminium skin. We've now got to map the aircraft completely, so we've got some plan views of the aircraft that show all the different skins and all the different panels, and we've got to go from front to back, wingtip to wingtip, and show on this plan exactly where any corrosion or damage is. That's for the underside and the top side, of course. When we've done that plan, we can then create the worksheets to actually rectify the work. What we've found with the Lancaster, condition-wise, is there's a few areas of corrosion that we knew about, a few areas we had to correct, which we will hopefully be able to do this winter. We've also found some areas that we didn't know about. Some of those on the undersides of the wings, so if you by the starboard undercarriage there, if you look above your head, you'll see there's some grey areas of corrosion. These are behind each engine, so it's a very similar level of corrosion behind each engine. This Lancaster did a lot of maritime work for the French in the 1950s and 60s, and it was painted white with black stripes of paint behind the engines. And what we found is the areas of corrosion correlate exactly to where that black paint was. So we're assuming it's something to do with that paint, whether it's a particular type of paint that was used that allowed moisture to be held against the fuselage, or whether the paint wasn't primed underneath it, for example, or something like that. But on the starboard outer engine, number 4, when you get a chance to look around a little bit after the talk, you'll see the corrosion is in an absolutely dead straight line, and it's a straight line between corrosion and no corrosion. So it does follow exactly the lines of that black paint. So the work we've got to do next week is a complete skin survey of the aircraft to map it out on these maps. What we've been doing this last week is creating a lot of the worksheets around that work. Because we are now registered with the CAA and therefore are answerable to the CAA for the work that we do, everything has got to be noted down in the proper worksheets and in the proper format to go into the final document which you present to the CAA to say this aircraft is now airworthy, and they will then sign off. Various things we've been doing this week while the paperwork's been created is the wings are in sections and bolt together. Where the wings bolt together, there's something called a fillet panel, which joins the gap between the wings. So if you look on the underside of the starboard wing there, just by the side of the undercarriage, you'll see an open gap that runs almost the full width of the wing. So that's where the outer wing bolts to the central main plane part of the aircraft, and there's a fillet panel that runs through there. What we've found is these fillet panels are held on by anchor nut strip. If you have a look at the table just behind you near the yellow grease tin, there's a set of anchor nut strips there. And that's made of mild steel, so it corrodes quite easily. We've found that a lot of the mild steel components on the aircraft are corroded. So these anchor nut strips are completely shot and corroded, and they're going to have to be replaced. So what we've been doing this last week is taking off as much of the old strip as we can get off within these fillet panels, ready for the replacement to go on. Because the aircraft with its history has been taken apart and put back together again a couple of times, things like the anchor nut strip and the fillet panels haven't necessarily been put back together as well as they could have been. Because when the aircraft was moved for the last time, it was deemed that all it was going to do was sit here as a static aircraft, wasn't even going to taxi run, wasn't going to fly. So it was just put back to a static condition. So on these fillet panels, where they should all be screwed down every inch with a 2BA screw, we found that quite often it had a screw every 4th or 5th hole, and then was just fabricked over the top of to keep the moisture out. So we've had quite a lot of work around various things like that to get them to a condition that we can then put them back into an airworthy condition. We've also removed the number 1 fuel tanks. The last time they were out, we believe, was in the early 1950s. The last time the tanks themselves were actually overhauled was 1952 for the starboard side and 1953 for the port side. You'll see the number 1 tanks, they're the biggest fuel tanks on the aircraft, and they are situated on display just underneath the wings of the Lang. They hold about 580 gallons, I think it is, in each inboard fuel tank, and then it reduces in the tanks as you go further outboard. So it's the first time we've been able to actually get up inside those fuel tank bays and see the condition of them. From there you can see the forward side of the rear spar and the rear side of the forward spar. The Lancaster's made, it's called the main spar, but it's actually a twin spar on the main plane of the aircraft. And there's 4 booms, there's a boom at the top and a boom at the bottom, at the front and the back. And then it's webbed in between for the strength of it. One of the jobs we've got next year, we won't be able to complete it this year, so next year we're going to completely remove the trailing edge of the aircraft. The trailing edge is kind of the back of the undercarriage rearwards. That all actually unbolts from the wing. That will mean that we can see the rear side of the rear spar. It'll also mean that we get to replace all the studs that hold the trailing edge on. One of the problems we've got is the trailing edge is bolted to the rear spar with steel studs. Those steel studs are corroding and wouldn't be classed as airworthy, so they've all got to be replaced. Unfortunately, it's not just a case of going down to Holford and getting hold of a stud and replacing it. There's several hundred, if not 1,000 studs that hold the trailing edge on, and all those have got to be individually made, and we've got to have a mod raised to actually replace them. The original studs that hold those on are the same as what they hold the wingtips on, and they're basically a threaded bar with a brazed washer in between. in the centre, sorry, and you bolt one through the spar and then you bolt the other through the trailing edge to hold it all together. Now you would never make that stud in the same way. Now you'd machine it out of a piece of metal rather than brazing this washer between it. So we've got to raise and mod to change the method of production, and we've got to raise and mod for the change of the material as well, because you can no longer get hold of the steel that they were made out of. You've got to substitute it for a different material. That means you've got to go through a stress house and have all the stress calculations done to find out if this new material is actually sufficient for the job to use. So just a simple thing of changing the studs that hold the trailing edge on, it's probably going to cost about £1,000 in paperwork to actually have the mod raised, and then it's going to be several thousand to have the studs actually made to start replacing them. So a simple job has gone from a week to change them all to several months to actually have everything in place to be able to do it. So the fuel tank bays, themselves, we found the starboard side is slightly worse condition than the port side, which is absolutely opposite to what the aircraft normally is. This Lancaster was stood out at at Blackpool, and the port side faced the sea. And whenever we've taken anything off the aircraft, which is the same starboard and port, we've found the port side to be in worse condition than the starboard side because it is facing the sea. But this has gone completely against normal tradition with this aircraft. The port side's really very good. Starboard side, there's a few corrosion issues with some mild steel parts. It shows slightly worse corrosion on these studs that hold the trailing edge on than the port side does. So that's created us with a little bit more work than we expected. Also, all of the fuel tank panels, so the panels that go underneath the fuel tanks, they're all held on by this anchor nut strip. So that's all got to be drilled off and replaced as well. Anchor nut strip wise, we managed to source some from America. There's 111 lengths at 6 foot each, so 666 feet length of gang channel, and it's cost about £12,500 just for the anchor nut strip. So it's quite a big investment just to put some nuts back on the aircraft. We've also just sourced some more 2BA anchor nuts, so they're nuts that hold all the little inspection panels on. We just ordered 1,000 of those, and they're £2.55 each. The other alternative was one that's £9.56 each, so we went for the £2.55 option. You'll see a few things are opened up and visible with the aircraft like this that you would never see before. It's the first time we've had the H2s Radar Dome off. So that's a Perspex dome that fits over the top of this radar. H2s Radar was brought out mid-war and is basically a ground mapping radar. There's not really many in existence. This might be the only one as far as we're aware. It's certainly the only one fitted to a Lancaster. A few things that we found, the main longeron on the aircraft, which is the strength from nose to tail, and it's this slightly thicker piece of aluminium that runs from the transportation joint here just up to the end of the bomb bay. So that's the main strength from nose to tail of the aircraft. It's a little bit like the main spar wingtip to wingtip, but it's nose to tail. That's the main strength, and we found there's quite a few rivets actually popped on that. The heads have come off, certainly underneath the port wing. So they're a fairly big rivet. It's no problem other than the fact that it's a big rivet to have to hammer back in, but it's quite a simple repair really. A few other things to repair on the aircraft. On the port side, by the pilot's left knee, basically just below that, there's a piece of aluminium skin work that needs to be replaced as well. Until we do the complete survey of the aircraft, we don't know truly areas of corrosion, how many can just be dressed back and are still okay, and how many have gone that little bit too deep and they've weakened the material so it has to be replaced. What you find with Avro, and what they were very keen on, was to put a rivet every inch. So as you see the aircraft, you've either got a rivet every inch or a rivet every half inch. They didn't think that was quite strong enough. So any panels that have to be replaced, there's an awful lot of drilling to do to actually get them out. When you drill a rivet out, you've got to make sure you drill through the centre of the rivet rather than beside it and create a figure of 8 hole, which creates you a lot more trouble. You'll find that all the horizontal rivet pattern is in stringers in the aircraft. Stringers run nose to tail the length of the aircraft, and all the vertical ones are in the formers, which form the shape of the cylinder of the aircraft, so to speak, going top to bottom. Okay.